What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the show. I've got a good one for you today. We're going to talk about conflict. And this is like a subject that just keeps coming up in my coaching session. So I think it's important to just put out a little bit of free information to help you guys maybe reframe or change your thoughts around conflict and fighting with your partner, right? And we're going to talk about the best way to end a fight. Because contrary to what some people might say, fighting is a very normal, healthy thing in a long-term relationship. I don't know very many like really healthy couples that do not fight. Because guess what? Usually we are attracted to and marry somebody that is different than us. I mean, in a lot of ways. I mean, you want to find somebody that, your core values are the same. But that being said, you know, they might like sushi and then you might like burgers. It's like there's gonna be gives and takes in any healthy long-term relationship. So it's important to know how to navigate conflict and do things like fight in a way that is progressive and at the same time keeping the other person's best interest at heart. Because what you don't want to have happen is that to have conflict always devolve into something that is just like a negative feeling, right? Because when you, over a period of time, get used to fighting being bad, well, then of course, like you're naturally going to be like, well, I don't want to do that, right? And as we know, avoiding conflict usually means not bringing up your needs. And if you don't bring up your needs, guess what? That breeds resentment. And resentment is a relationship and marriage killer over time, big time. So, what's the best way to fight? Here it is. Stop trying to win. Stop trying to win the fight. And here's what I mean. When your wife or your husband brings you something, right? Something difficult, whether it's something you did or something that they experienced that didn't feel good. The goal is not to get defensive and prove them wrong. I see this all the time. It's like, yeah, but this. Hey, you didn't take the trash out today. And it just like, man, bummed me out. It's like a lot of times somebody will go, yeah, but I did it like the past 9 days and I just didn't do it one day, right? What's the big deal? And that's where the fight, like you fight on the surface level. When you start trying to understand what's going on for your partner, it's like they're bringing something to you, usually because they feel missed, they feel hurt, they have an unmet need. So there's usually something beneath the surface, right? It's not always just about the trash can or cleaning up or the socks on the floor, not getting into the hamper or forgetting to pick up the milk or, you know, the tone of voice, right? It's more about how that is perceived in their system. And what I mean by that is like, okay, instead of fighting, right, you can just say, oh, yeah, you're right. I didn't take the trash out. You tell me more about what's important about that for you, right? And she could go, you know what? I just feel unloved when you don't take the trash out, right? It's not necessarily about the act, it's about the felt sense. And for her or him or whoever the circumstance is, usually it's like you not doing that thing can oftentimes be like, that equals he doesn't love me or that equals she doesn't love me. And, of course, every relationship is going to be different. Everybody's going to have different wants, needs, and how that looks to meet those wants and needs are going to be different. That's why it's so important to get curious. That's why it's so important to not win, right? And the other thing to keep in mind is when a lot of times you're in an argument, we know because, you guys went back and listened to episode 3 on foundations of self-control. When we're in an argument, a lot of times one of us is not in green. We're not in ventral, we're in yellow, or maybe we're in red. And our best hardware, our prefrontal cortex, is offline. And that's our ability to have executive function, to regulate our emotions, to basically think logically, right? So if we're in our emotions, we aren't thinking logically. Responding to emotions with logic is a losing battle, right? It's like mixing oil and water. That's why clinging to that you've done it 9 times out of 10 to basically compensate the one doesn't ever work, because you're trying to fight emotions with logic, and that just, again, oil and water, they don't mix. You don't it just doesn't work, right? So instead, what we want to do is be curious, right? Don't let it make you furious. And if you find yourself being furious, get curious, right? That's one of the favorite lines that I heard. I forget who taught me that. It could have been my couples counselor years ago. Um, but yeah, get curious before you get furious. And again, once you learn how to regulate your nervous system and your responses to conflict and your responses to, more difficult emotions start to subside, and you start to be able to hang in this tension of uncertainty and like discomfort of, letting your partner down, and all that stuff is just easy for you to carry. It's like, okay, there's no impulse to feel like you have to be defensive or to feel like you have to shut down, right? Because usually it's like, hey, we either get defensive or we just shut down, right? And a lot of times when we shut down, that can influence our partner to even push and poke a little bit further. Um, it's a very common thing, call it anxious and avoidant attachment, for the anxious person to bring something to the avoidant to shut down, the shutdown to be perceived as disconnection by the anxious person, and then the anxious person push forward with more questions, which then again just pushes the avoidant person away, and might even lead into, eventually that avoidant person yelling or really striking back, verbally, or ideally not physically, but just like barking back. Think of like a dog being backed into a corner. But the thing is, it's like both people are on the same team. It's just learning how to communicate difficult things when you're in a disagreement, and have that turn out to be a healthy outcome. So, I mean, the best way to fight is to go into it with curiosity. And the hardest thing to do is to not make it about you, right? The hardest thing to do is to not get defensive or to not shut down, especially when somebody is upset, if they're dysregulated, if they're talking in a tone of voice that, might not feel so good. It's your responsibility to be able to manage that and be in control of your reactions to the emotions that come up when somebody else is upset at you, right? Because a lot of times when our partners, especially, are upset at us, the felt sense of when that happens is a familiar feeling to a lot of people. And it's always interesting to hear my clients' reactions when they respond. And I ask them if that's a familiar feeling. And they're like, yeah. Why do you ask? I'm like, all right, well, familiar, like it's been around for a while. They're like, yeah, it feels like I've felt its way a lot for a long time. Like, interesting. How long have you known your wife for, or your husband for? Well, like 10, 15 years. And is it fair to say that feeling has been around longer than that? And they're like, yeah, interesting. So your reactions to their emotions brings up something in you that you felt even before you met them. Now, could it be possible that your reactions to their emotions is something that is a response that you've learned from long, long ago? And that's always the kicker, right? And that's at the root of this. And that's where people have the most trouble navigating conflict, is because a lot of times, again, going back to episode 3, Foundations of Self-Control, we get kicked out of green and into yellow or red. The smart part of our brain turns off and we start getting defensive or shut down because the we're perceiving a threat, right? And we want to change the perception of a disagreement or a fight or a disappointment from our spouse. Oh, like we want to rewire the response so that it's not a threat or a felt sense of a threat. And when you can do that, that is when you can really lean into being curious. Because it's easy for me to say, like, yeah, dude or dudettes, get curious before you get furious. But then in the moment, have it be like, how do I do that? Because, like, I just have this overwhelming felt sense of whatever it is. And I feel like I just go offline and I'm like not in control of how I respond. And I'm like, dude, all you need to do is learn how to regulate your nervous system during conflict, and eventually you can rewire your responses and not react the way that you react, right? Because so many people, when they get into a fight or a disagreement, they'll say things or do things that they regret, right? 30 minutes later, an hour later, the next day, they're like, you have that pit in your stomach. I'm sure that you've experienced this where it's like, oh man, why did I say that? Gosh, dang it. Right. Or it's like you had all, how about this one? Or all of a sudden, 30, 60 minutes later, after a disagreement and you froze up, you have all this smart stuff come into your brain like, oh man, I should have said that. Why didn't I think of that? And it's like actually really explainable why you didn't think of that. And it's because your prefrontal was offline because you were perceiving a threat. Your nervous system was like, okay, it's time to click on yellow, time to click on fight or flight. Um, and along with that, you lose access to the smart part of your brain. And all this stuff goes on outside your conscious awareness, of course. So it's like you don't notice it. And all of a sudden, it's like, all the next thing you know, you're in a fight. You're like, dang it, I didn't get curious again. It's like, yeah, it's because you need to learn how to regulate your nervous system, dude. Um, yeah, of course, simple, maybe not easy. And if, this is stuff that I support, men and women with all the time. And it's so awesome after working with people and to hear them be able to go like, man, I don't shut down anymore. I don't get defensive. And all of a sudden it's like, my spouse is feeling heard. So all of a sudden they're validated. So they don't feel like they have to be all critical and come at me in that way. They can come at me in a very much more under control way because they know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I can hear them, and it's just good stuff. So if you're looking for more support like this, check me out. Link in the comments to book a free call with me. Learn more about coaching one-on-one. And as always, thanks for listening. Send a review. Send this to anybody that it might help. And appreciate you guys. And I'll catch you on the next one.